For Creamer Media's Polity, I'm Shannon de Rehove. Deloitte Senior Manager Daniela Kafuris joins me to discuss the Protection of Personal Information Bill, which was recently signed into law. The signing into law of the Protection of Personal Information Bill, or POPI, recently is a significant step towards facilitating cross-border trade for the South African economy. Can you elaborate on this statement?
Absolutely. So South Africa is not the first country to sign a data privacy or data protection law across the globe. Literally, we are the 102nd country across the globe that has signed a law such as this into effect. So why is that? Why do we have different jurisdictions across the globe that are concerned about bringing a data protection or data privacy law within their country? And it's purely around protecting that personal information and the cross-border flow of that personal information. So what it essentially means for us is, for many years, Europe has had their directive since 1995. They would not share data across borders unless another jurisdiction had the same or similar law as them, or they would have to contract their specific legal principles into an agreement with a specific entity into that country. So by South Africa enacting the Protection of Personal Information Act, it places us on an international level where we can actually have free flow of data across borders. And that is essentially how we're going to facilitate international trade with that. So from our perspective, we've definitely seen a lot of clients that have a global footprint, or they wish to engage more globally, and the data protection laws have stopped them from doing that because our companies have not been compliant to their standards.
The POPI Act could present a potential challenge for companies who aren't compliant by the deadline date. Can you tell us about these challenges, as well as why this is a challenge for cloud users specifically?
Okay, well, in general, you're dealing with a piece of legislation that's going to govern the way you manage data within your business, whether it's in hard copy format or soft copy format. So if you just had to take some time and think about the amount of data we process, the amount of information that comes in, and now you have a piece of legislation that's going to regulate that entire life cycle, it's going to change the way you do things to a certain extent. So compliance is not going to be easy, but it can be made easier the more you understand about data management as well. With respect to the cloud has a few issues to it around that cross-border transfer of data, because a lot of the cloud providers are hosted in the US, in Europe, wherever else they may be. They're not always situated within South Africa. So the cross-border element becomes an issue, because now we need to take into consideration the very same issue that Europe had. Okay, does that country have privacy laws where the cloud provider is hosted? How do we know our data is actually secure there? From an Africa perspective, a lot of the cloud providers across the globe do not provide service levels for organizations situated in Africa. So there are a couple of elements that you need to take into consideration around cloud. No one is saying do not engage in cloud, do not do it. There's just a little bit of homework to be done before, and more of a calculated decision that needs to be taken rather than just signing up to an online agreement.
You state that companies need to start putting measures in place not just to increase, but also to maintain their competitive edge. Please elaborate on this.
So POPI has a lot built into it around consent and engaging with consumers, okay? So although we know that when we're speaking about personal information, it refers to HR data, to customer data, and data about third-party service providers. But now when we're talking about a customer, and after South Africa's gone through this progression of the Consumer Protection Act, and we're bringing out this data privacy legislation now that was enacted last week, that regulates how we're going to look after that consumer's personal information, you're getting a lot of a consumer-centric view around it. So it provides an opportunity for organizations, while they're getting compliant, while they're looking at the consents of, do I have permission to process this information? Do I need to talk to my customers about this? How can I showcase what we're doing around this? The competitive edge is you need to get there first. The more requests we'll all receive from all the companies we deal with around consents from a direct marketing perspective, from can we share your information across borders, up to, we're sharing it with third-party service providers, how many times will I say yes to that? the first people that get to me, the first people that come to me, will be the ones that I'll embrace differently. After a while, when you hit the 8th or 10th company that wants to talk to me about my information, I might get tired of it. So what we're essentially saying is there's such a competitive advantage to get there first, to start speaking to your customers first and showcasing that they can build that trust with you even more through this process.
How long can companies expect to work on becoming compliant with POPI? Do you think it's too late for some?
I don't necessarily think it's too late for many. However, that can also be elaborated on. So the general compliance period in POPI will be 1 year. Obviously, although it has been enacted, the actual compliance start date for that 1 year period has not been provided. So the President will publish that in the Government Gazette. So once that date is published, there will be 12 months for everyone to get compliant, assuming that the regulator is also established by that time. So what we believe is that they are providing some time for the regulator to be established before that time period begins. So in answering your question, it depends on what type of industry you're in, because you have very heavily regulated industries like financial services, insurance, healthcare, telecommunications. They will take longer because of the amount of data that they actually have at their disposal. Whereas the mining industry could probably do it within a year. They are focused on HR data, being in the mining industry as opposed to consumer data. So depending on your industry, the answer will differ. What we have seen in the heavily regulated industries, it can take anything from 3 to 5 years to get compliant. What we have always suggested is said, right, well, take the necessary steps, draw up your roadmap, see what you can do, and be honest about what you cannot do within that year. And as long as you have a plan attached to that, at least you know where you're going and you have something to showcase to the regulator.
Can you explain some of the downsides to not being compliant with POPI? How will POPI affect telemarketers and direct marketers?
So downsides once the compliance period is up is obviously the penalties and fines that can be issued. So the fines would be up to 10 million rand around a privacy incident, and there is also a little bit of jail time thrown in there, just to put it in. And we've obviously been asked the question quite often: do you think anyone's going to go to jail for POPI? And the true answer is there have been some in Europe that this has happened to. However, you're not going to essentially go to jail if you forgot to register the opt-out of your customer and it's one instance. But where you have a data breach and a data leakage and you didn't take compliance very seriously and you completely neglected that entire issue, then that would probably be put on the table. So essentially, once the compliance period is up, you're looking at the penalties, the fines, possible imprisonment as an and/or, always added in. The biggest issue, though, is really not the fine. The biggest issue is the reputational damage. So what we've always seen, and you'll have noticed across the globe, whenever there's been a hack or loss of data in any sort of way, they've had to provide this public notification. So POPI has a breach notification built into it saying, okay, if you've lost data or you think you've lost data, if you've been hacked or you think you've been hacked, you need to let the regulator know, and you will need to let every single person that has been affected by that, let them know. So sometimes that's a public notification really in the media to just tell everybody, look, we've lost your data, you need to be careful and be mindful of now what's happening as well. And the reputational damage is the worst. We've seen companies that have lost 50% of their clients from something like that happening, because once you lose someone's trust, to rebuild that is the actual problem. So we focus quite a lot around incident management and how you manage that incident, because people will get hacked, people will lose data. You're never going to be outside of that world, because no one can ever be completely secure. But how you manage that incident when it happens is really what is going to matter going forward.
What are the main costs and main benefits of POPI compliance for companies and individuals?
So for companies, it is quite a significant cost to get the right resources involved to do this. You're looking at a situation where you haven't had experts in this field for a very long time building on their knowledge. So there's really just a handful. So to try and say I'm going to appoint someone within the organization that must just do this and manage it is quite difficult to do. So trying to find the right resources and capacity, the time to actually get compliant is a big problem. Where you have significant cost is where you get a situation where you're trying to force compliance onto a company and the people don't want to change. So a lot of cost can be saved, a lot of benefits can be realized where you actually say, right, well, how can we streamline this into what we're currently doing around the business? How can we make POPI fit within our business and still be compliant? So sometimes a different view on it can significantly reduce the costs of how to actually get there. Once again, the answer will also depend on the industries. The heavily regulated industries need to take other laws into account as well. It's not the only piece of legislation they need to comply with. They probably have a list of another 140 that they need to actually think about. So taking some time to think about how to do that in a smart way and tick boxes across your regulatory universe is going to be quite important.
Some people are confused between the Secrecy Bill and the POPI Act. What's the difference between the two? Some people only. So the Secrecy Bill is the protection of state information bill. So that is completely different to POPI, that speaks to the protection of personal information. Personal information is literally any information that can be used to identify you. So it's not just your name, surname, and ID number. It's your biometrics information, it's your employment data, your medical information, all of those sorts of things. Whereas the Secrecy Bill is literally about what government wants to classify as top secret, and almost a classification mechanism of certain types of of information, not personal information, sorry. So there are key differences. They apply to completely different people. Who's going to ensure regulation of compliance to this act?
So an information regulator will be established. So very similar to your Competition Commission, your NCC for the CPA, we're going to have an information regulator. So this regulator should be established before that compliance period begins, and they will be the policing authority, because you need to notify someone of the breach notification. They're also there to encourage awareness, assist you with any other issues you might be having around this. So each country in the world that has enacted a privacy law has some form of regulator or data protection authority that governs it, and we will have the same here in South Africa.
That was Daniela Kafouris, Deloitte Senior Manager, to speak about the POPI Bill.